Yes. Okay, so we're on page 109, the ripe old age of 137. As mentioned above, one is synonym for trumpet in the Torah is a mighty instrument, kli oz. Oz, ayin zayin, is mighty, which has a numerical value of 137. So we're getting back to this number 137 again. And yes, and a couple of people could put on their cameras. That'll be good. I mean, I look green, so you don't have to worry about anything. Hey, welcome, welcome. Okay, we're on page 137. And we're saying how we just read the first two lines, the ripe old age of 137. And clay oz is oz meaning mighty, or might is the word for trumpet, and it equals 137. We're going to see, well, that's very exciting. In the Torah, we often find accounts of an individual's lifespan. The most common lifespan is 137 years old, an age reached explicitly by three individuals. So we mentioned that, the answer to that quiz question last week. Yishmael, the son of Abraham, Levi, the son of Yaakov, and Amram, the father of Moshe, all lived to the age of 137. Indeed, 137 is a most significant number. Now, although we're not going to read this book next, Rav Yitzchak wrote a whole book on the number 137, an entire book. Look, it's a thick book. It's called 137, The Riddle of Creation. So this, you can see there's a whole lot that can be said about 137. We're just saying a few things about it, but it's an exciting topic just to keep everyone posted. Okay, so again, we're on page 109. Indeed, 137 is the most significant number. Nonetheless, Moshe was 121 years old at his death, but his eyes had not dimmed, nor did he lose vitality. That's a quote from the end of Chumash, from the end of Devorim. This is why the classic Jewish blessing regarding age is, may you live to be 120. You might have wondered where that came from. It came from Moshe. Okay, that's as far as we got last time. Yes. And I'll just say, because I brought a few things along for show and tell, besides the book on 137, I'm bringing again, we only really have a couple of more weeks left of this book, and then we're going to be starting Yitzhak's book, Living in Divine Space, which is about the 6 constant mitzvahs, a meditation on the 6 constant mitzvahs. Very exciting. That's part of our show and tell. You can get that, and depending on which corner of the earth you are right now, you should be able to get it. Okay, so let's finish up this part, and then I'll tell my joke. The Mishnah teaches us that old age begins at 60, and that there are another 77 years to go until one reaches 137. Now, that wasn't too difficult math. This division of 137 into 60 and 77 exactly reflects the numerical value of the two-word phrase clay oz for trumpet. The word instrument, kli oz, has a numerical value of 60, and the word mighty, oz, ayin zayin, also meaning boldness, has a numerical value of 77. From here, we infer that to live from 60 to 137 years old entails being mighty or bold. The quote from the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, be as bold as a tiger to do the will of your Father in heaven. And again, we have to always remember when we're reading these things here, it's also an empowerment. We're being empowered by the Baal Shem Tov, by the Rebbe, by Rav Yitzchak, that we should be oz as a tiger to do the will of your Father in heaven. We're being empowered. So we're turning to 110. When it comes to youthful audacity, the animal whose name comes from boldness, Ezus, is the goat, Az, again, ayin zayin. This relates to the 2 goats that were offered as sacrifices on Yom Kippur, one that was sacrificed to Hashem and the other one sent to Azalzel. And Azalzel is ayin zayin, also beginning with those 2 letters, ayin zayin, aleph, zayin, lamed. Another word that shares the same 2-letter subroot Ayin Zion. As we mature, we need to determine that our initiatives are entirely holy. Perhaps there are illegitimate remnants of selfishness intermingled in them. The two kid goats on Yom Kippur rectify such self-centered actions. We need to admit that we have selfish intentions and cast them to Azazel, the appropriate place for inappropriate audacity. Audacity is chutzpah, and it's saying that we're casting our selfish intentions to Azazel. I never really got the thing of Azazel, the scapegoat, putting on one's sins, but when you, this way makes it very clear what Rabbi Yitzchak is explaining. It's selfish intentions that we're casting to Azazel, the appropriate place for inappropriate chutzpah. By doing so, the correct type of chutzpah or boldness comes to the fore, i.e. holy chutzpah, which empowers us to enter the inner sanctum of holiness, yet exit unscathed. So this holy chutzpah, I mean, it takes holy chutzpah, let's say, to do mifsayim. Holy chutzpah, like you're going to go knock on someone's door. It takes a lot of holy chutzpah. Especially these young boys, they knock on the door of the chief executive, of the company. It takes, so that's holy chutzpah. So what we want to get rid of is that the illegitimate remnants of selfishness. We spoke about when we were learning our past book, Transforming Darkness into Light, that when we do mitzvahs, we have to give Hashem credit to the good, for the good that we do. Remember that Hashem gives us the energy to do it. Hashem gives us the situation to do it. And Hashem gives us the motivation to do it on a more subtle level. So if we give Hashem credit for the good that we do, then we never come to entitlement. We never come to eskumpmir, that I did this for this person and they're not doing it for me, which is really a bummer. No one likes to do anything for anyone who feels entitled to it. So to get rid of that entitlement, give Hashem credit for the good that we do, and any selfishness intermingled is what we have in mind when we're reading about Azazel on Yom Kippur, that we're just throwing to him all our illegitimate remnants of selfishness intermingled in our mitzvahs. Interesting that that's what we want to get rid of. We need to admit that we have selfish intentions and cast them to Azazel, the appropriate place for inappropriate audacity. By doing so, the correct type of audacity or boldness comes to the fore, holy chutzpah, which empowers us to enter the inner sanctum of holiness, yet exit unscathed. Another beautiful relationship between 137 and 60 is that whereas 137 is the numerical value of Kabbalah, Kuf Beis Lamed Hey, 60 is the numerical value of the Hebrew term for Jewish law, halacha. To live harmoniously to a ripe old age, we need to balance our study of halacha with a good dose of Kabbalah, the Torah's inner dimension, of our Chassidus. It's interesting, he's saying that we're learning halacha and saying that we should make sure that we also learn some Pnimius Torah. But actually, I think for most of us, we are learning Pnimius Torah, and we need a little dose of halacha from time to time, because I spoke about that. One of the things that really impressed me when we were on our shlichus in communist Russia, that the Jewish people we met, like every halacha was exciting, another way to connect with Hashem. Well, my American friends were a little more nervous about learning halacha, that they're going to tell me I can't do something I want. I mean, that is risky. I don't know, I'm laughing and crying at the same time, but you get the general idea that we have to have a mixture of both nigla, that's doing chumash, saying Tehillim, a little Rambam, that's all nigla, but throw in, we have to learn Chassidus, a little Tanya, some Maimorim, Sichas. Right now, I guess what we're learning, we would consider Chassidus too, the inner dose, Kabbalah and Chassidus. Okay, so that finishes Gevurah, and the mitzvah of Gevurah were the two trumpets, and the two trumpets were any musical instrument, and it's connected with the Levium And the Levium sang. The Levium sang and played musical instruments, which is like a vora because it goes up from below like a fire. And so now we're up to Tiferes, which is beauty, chapter 14 on page 111. And yes, beauty, stay focused. Okay, that's one of the things to have in mind. And the inner part of Tiferes, by the way, is rachamim, compassion, because we're trying to get all those inner parts lined up. The sphere of Tiferes, beauty, follows Gevura and is associated in general with clothing. In particular, the Torah describes the high priest's garments as for honor and beauty. So we're actually going to look at some pictures. This week and next week speaks about the vessels and the Mishkan, and the next week the garments of the Kohen Gadol. So we're going to. I brought along 2 books. You can get this nice big one on the Mishkan, a nice thick book with lots of colored pictures. I'll show the pictures of the Kohen Gadol. Or if you're going to be swimming across the river and don't want to take anything too heavy, they have this little booklet also, which has pictures of the Mishkan and pictures of the garments of the Kohen Gadol. So it's good for this parsha, next parsha, if you're doing Chumash, to look at it, to look at these pictures. Okay. The most distinctive adornment the Kohen Gadol wore was the gold forehead plate inscribed with the words Kodesh L'Havaya, holy to God. The Kohen Gadol was commanded to keep his mind focused on it at all times. He couldn't forget when he had that gold plate that said Kodesh LaHashem, he was supposed to remember it all the time. He should constantly be aware of it and never allow himself to be distracted. Earlier, we mentioned that distraction is a form of forgetfulness. So get that? Distraction is a form of forgetfulness that can be utilized for positive purposes. Right. There's things that it's for us to forget, like if we're about, let's say we're driving ourselves crazy by reliving how somebody didn't give us the proper smile for us 4 years ago. And we're reliving it with a lot of gusto and enthusiasm and getting worked up and despondent and despair and angry and all of things that's a good thing to be distracted from. So there's certain memories that mental health asks that we be, unless we want to call a person and, be best friends with them right now, which we could do, straighten it all out, or else say this isn't the right time, let's think about something else for a little while. But we have to know what we spoke about, thought management. There's no way to avoid that thought management. So distraction is a form of utilized for positive purposes. Indeed, the forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol represents those memories we never want to abandon. So this adornment must certainly be good for memory attention. Memories we never want to abandon, like why we became from, our connection with Hashem, all the kind things Hashem has done for us in our lifetime. There's things we want to remember. So this is all connected with the plate on the Kohen's forehead. So I have this book open. Not sure how it's going to work, but here we have our model Kohen Gadol. Can everyone see that? It's very exciting seeing it in this nice book. And he has a forehead plate, a gold plate over here. Here's the Koshin, which has 12 stones, 4 rows of 3. And then there's the Koshin is the breastplate, and then there's the ephod, this backwards apron that comes up his back and connects to the Hoshin on top through chains and on the bottom through blue ribbons. So it's all connected, the ephod and the Hoshin. So wasn't that fun looking at that? Yes. And you can also get the miniature version here of the Kohen Gadol in his costume. But it's good to have, sometimes a chumash, a good chumash might have pictures too, but they might not be in such beautiful color. Okay. So tefillin, bottom of page 111. The tefillin, like the Kohen Gadol's forehead plate, is also referred to as beauty, as stated in the morning bracha that alludes to tefillin, Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, who crowns Yisroel with beauty, Oteh Yisroel b'Tefera. Did you know that was referring to tefillin? Next page, 112. The head tefillin are the crown of a Jewish man's clothing. They contain the four Torah paragraphs that refer to the mitzvah to don tefillin. So there's 4 Torah paragraphs in the tefillin, and all 4 refer to the mitzvah to don tefillin. The last 3 passages state that they should be ornaments between your eyes, but the first passage states that the tefillin should be a reminder between your eyes, zikaron. Clearly, the head tefillin is closely related to memory. The head tefillin is closely related to memory. While the name of God was inscribed but once on the forehead placed of the high priest, it said Kodesh LaHashem, Hashem's name once. It appears 21 times in the scrolls contained in the head tefillin. Now, I would never have guessed that right. Can you believe 21 times the name Hashem appears in the scrolls contained in the head tefillin? From here, the sages deduce that there is even more reason for every Jewish male to focus his mind on the tefillin. For example, one is not allowed to sleep while wearing tefillin. There are differing opinions about how the Torah passage should be ordered in the head tefillin. Each opinion corresponds to a different sphera. The 2 opinions that correspond to Bina, the mother principle, and to Chachma, the father principle, are those of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, respectively. And Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, the Rebbe encouraged all boys from the age of 13 to start wearing both of those 2 kinds of tefillin that correspond to Bina and Chachma. And they actually start 2 months before their 13th birthday. Boys start, they practice for 2 months. Taking care to wear both Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin thus affects the desired union of male wisdom and female understanding. A second recommendation for reinforcing the mitzvah of tefillin and thereby strengthening one's memory is to follow the Lubavitcher Rebbe's advice to ascertain that one's tefillin are kosher by having them checked once a year. In making sure that her husband's tefillin are checked annually, the wife actively participates in the mitzvah of tefillin. And I have footnote 5 circled. So this is chapter 14, footnote 5. It's on page 174. Any of us who are concerned because women do not wear tefillin can relax in the knowledge that a man's tefillin belong to his wife also. The tefillin worn on the arm are associated with the woman's head. So when someone dons tefillin in the morning, he should have in mind that he is doing so on his wife's behalf also. So that's a very interesting idea that the husband is doing on his wife's behalf. And when the wife is doing her mitzvahs, she's doing it on her husband's behalf. And the first time I really got this idea down, I was at someone's house and there was a very simple young couple there. And the husband went to daven Ma'ariv, and the wife said to me after that he's davening Ma'ariv for us, meaning for him, for the 2 of them. And I really love that idea. I'd never really thought of it. The husband, it's not so much of a custom that women daven Ma'ariv. The Alter Rebbe did encourage 2 Shemona Esreis a day, but most women do Shacharis and Mincha if they have the time. But Ma'ariv, so that her husband was davening Ma'ariv for her. Isn't that cool? That's true love. L'chaim, l'chaim. Okay, so we have a few people with their cameras on, and I'm very grateful. And if a few more people could put on their cameras, I'll be even more grateful. Yes, see, it's a wonderful thing to put on. Then it's like a Farbringen. Then it's like an exciting real life Farbringen, almost like real life. Yes, I like that. Okay. Okay, the high priest's ephod and breastplate, the bottom of page 112. In the Torah, there are 2 other accessories that the Kohen Gadol in the temple was commanded to wear, both of which are also explicitly related to memory. The memory stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod. So on the shoulder pieces of the ephod, remember, it's an apron that comes up in the back and then comes over his shoulders and connects with the Hoshen, which has 12 stones. The breastplate has 12 stones. Got that, everyone? You know, it's interesting how Rashi figures out what the ephod looks like, that it was like a backwards apron with it going across the whole back. up and then up the back and then with straps to the front, was that while he was trying to figure it out, he says this, Rashi says this, that two princesses, two French princesses went riding, horseback riding past him, and he wondered why Hashem wanted him to see two French princesses riding horseback. And he realized that they were wearing, for their riding costume, it was like a backwards apron, you know, that you sit on one part and then it goes up the back and then it comes over the sides. So he realized that Hashem sent the two French princesses on horseback so he would know what the ephod looked like. That's very handy when you're getting on, you know, you're on Hashem's really good side when you're trying to figure something out and somebody rides by with the exact answer. You can tell you're getting it right. Okay. To the top of 113. In Kabbalah, the shoulders represent the transition of information from the forefront of our conscious minds to the back of our minds, where it lapses into forgetfulness. The Kohen Gadol wore the stones of memory on his shoulders, thus reinforcing the connection necessary for optimal memory, that it shouldn't just go back into forgetfulness. We should remember what we need to remember, like Hashem's presence. That's number one on the list for how to have a good memory. Remember Hashem's presence. Yes, let's do it. The breastplate housed 12 gemstones, each of which was also engraved with the name of one of the 12 tribes. I'm going to open my book again because I'm quite excited. It's a little awkward, but I don't want to spill anything. But here I'm showing you again. So here is the breastplate. You can see the 4 rows of 3 stones each. And each of them had the name of a tribe written on it. Okay. Attached to the upper corner of the choshen were 2 rings in which were inserted 2 thick gold chains. The other ends of the chains were attached to a ring on each of the shoulder pieces. So it went from the shoulder pieces down to the choshen. Here we perceive an ascent from the heart, represented by the breastplate worn over the heart, to the mind, represented by the ephod worn over the shoulders. So the ephod, it came from the back over the shoulders. It had 2 stones. It had chains that connected it to the breastplate. Yes, chains. Okay. So we said that the other ends, okay, the shoulder. Here we perceive an ascent from the heart, represented by the breastplate worn over the heart, to the mind, represented by the ephod worn over the shoulders. You know, it doesn't mention it here, but I remember learning from Y.Y. Jacobson, a sikha from the Rebbe. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs that the ephod should not be separated from the choshen. The choshen should not be separated from the ephod. They have to always be tied together. And it's because of this connection of mind and heart that the mind and the heart have to be working together. So the ephod represents the mind, and the choshen, which is called the breastplate, represents the heart. Okay. By contrast, the Torah states, and you shall know this day and integrate it into your heart that Havai is God in heaven above and on the earth below. There is none else. Ein od, which we say in the davening a few times a day, which suggests a downward movement from the mind to the heart. This 2-way street is echoed in the word memory, zikaron, that appears 4 times with reference to the accessories. Of these 4 occurrences, it appears 3 times without the letter vav, zikaron, just zayin, kaf, resh, lang, and nun, which alludes to an upward movement from the heart to the mind. And once more with the full spelling zikaron, with a vav in there, alluding to the downward movement from mind to heart. So vav, the letter vav always represents this, as we draw it as a downward movement from mind to heart. So it's a 2-way connection, that our minds and hearts should be connected with each other, right? It's much better that way than someone who has a certain philosophy, but they don't live by it, right? We try to live by our philosophy. It's often challenging, but we're trying, right? Right. These memorily related references to clothing teach us that there is something about dressing properly that can aid memory. Now, there's an interesting idea. This is important for women too, who represent the beauty of the home. It's a good thing to represent. The woman is similar to the Kohen Gadol in the fact that she wears more beautiful clothing than the man. We're similar to the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol himself was the Balabasta, the homemaker in the Beis HaMikdash, and his clothing resembled a woman's clothing. The ephod in particular was like a woman's apron. So we've spoken about this idea that a woman, if you're taking a spoon off the table, dirty spoon, and putting it in the sink, it's like being like the Kohen Gadol. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to make the house beautiful. It's a mitzvah to make the house a dwelling place for Hashem. So all of the things we do, all of these things we should feel like we're like the Kohen Gadol serving in the Beis HaMikdash. That makes it a lot more interesting, doesn't it? Yes. Okay. Indeed, in Jewish law, we learned that dressing with two garments at once is liable to cause forgetfulness. So it's just be one garment. Don't put on two garments at once, as is sleeping in certain garments. Okay, so I have footnote 14 circled. Oh, it's from Mishnah Bruro. Here's, I'm going to read it 14 on page 175. According to some opinions, one should also refrain from taking two garments off together. Similarly, sleeping with clothing beneath one's head and wiping wet hands on one's clothing are not conducive to memory. Now, sometimes it's very tricky, especially if you're in someone else's house and you've washed your hands without making sure there was something handy to dry them on, and we're not supposed to dry them on our clothes. Don't tell anyone, dry them on somebody's curtain. I didn't know what to do. It dried quickly. You would never know that I had dried my I'm like, well, you're not supposed to use your clothes because it's not good for memory. So we must look around and get some, or carry. People, could carry their own little towel in their pocket, whatever the case may be when you're traveling. There's somebody with a towel now. Bracha has her towel. She's ready for hand drying in all situations. Okay, so let's have a little story. The following anecdote illustrates this. In his youth, Reb Michal of Oppercheck became a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. He had studied many books on Jewish philosophy. After a time, he complained to the Alter Rebbe that the previous learned philosophical ideas often disrupted his thoughts and confused his study of Hasidus. Everyone got that? The philosophies he had learned before was confusing him. The Alter Rebbe suggested that he should leave his socks on when he went to sleep, because one who does so is prone to forgetfulness, and he will thus forget all that he'd studied previously. Doesn't it seem a little anxiety producing doing that? The narrator of this anecdote adds that when he heard this account from his mentor, he asked if Reb Michal could not have forgotten other things too, things that he did not wish to forget. But the mentor replied that he was certain that sleeping in his socks would be effective for forgetting only those things he wished to forget. Now, that's useful information, especially in the winter when our toes might be cold when we're going to sleep, right? And we might want, so if we're sleeping in our socks or part of the night, or sometimes one sock actually works perfectly, have in mind, it's effective for forgetting only those things we wish to forget. Now that is a cool thing to keep in mind. Isn't that handy that we're learning this information together, that we're learning about sleeping in socks, that you can forget what you only want to forget and not forget things you want to remember. Once again, this reminds us that the wisdom of good memory is selective memory. Again, this idea that we speak a lot about thought management. So it's memory management. Let's remember the good things. Let's remember things that we feel gratitude about. Doesn't that sound like, let's forget about the things that work us up and that we're not going to do anything to solve it. We're just working ourselves up. Let's forget those things. So selective memory, get that sock, keep that one sock on. Okay, do not forget. So now the word not, it's kind of joking. It's spelled K-N-O-T. Before paper tissues were invented, people would have their handkerchief at hand, ready to tie a knot in it if they had something important to remember. Did you know about that? Since the invention of the mobile phone and its memo application, the handkerchief idea has become obsolete. We can leave ourselves a little note. We just have to remember to look at it, of course. But we still have an important article of clothing that goes with us wherever we may be to remind us of the most significant things in life, the tzitzis. So this is something else that the husband can wear for his wife. Or we could look at people's wear. I like that sight of tzitzis flying in the wind, 3-year-olds driving their little tricycle with their tzitzis flying in the wind. The tzitzis are the knotted fringes that must be attached to a 4-cornered garment, and you shall see it, and you shall remember all my mitzvahs, and you shall do them. So this quote is, we say it's from Devorah, it's from Bamidbar, it's from the last, we say it in the last paragraph of the Shema, the 3 paragraphs that follow when we say Shema Yisrael. And following that is, of course, what we've studied many times, one of the 6 constant mitzvahs that we're going to be learning about in our next book, Living in Divine Space, which is lo sasaru, that we shouldn't follow after our hearts and eyes to prostitute ourselves after them. We shouldn't prostitute ourselves after our thoughts is one of the 6 constant mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe says we should be very happy when we have a chance to fulfill it, because we're simcha shel mitzvah. I'm having a horrible thought and I could not follow it. I could not prostitute myself. Yay. Okay, so we got that idea. So it's right after, and you shall see it, and you shall remember all my mitzvahs, and you shall do them. Page 115. Rashi explains that the tzitzis is reminiscent of all the 613 mitzvahs because the numerical value of tzitzis, tzadik yud taf, is 600, and together with the 5 knots and 8 strings on each tassel, this equals 613. The 17th century Torah commentator, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, the Or HaChaim HaKodesh, explains that the tzitzis is like a coat of arms or a uniform that we wear to remind us that we're servants of God. Isn't that interesting? A man wearing, so woman is, we can just remember this because we were given extra powers to remember that we're servants of God. Or we could look at, we happen to see someone's tzitzis. Every time we see tzitzis sticking out, we can remember that the Or HaChaim HaKodesh said it's a uniform to remind us that we're servants of God. The knotted fringes on each of the 4 corners of the garment remind us that God is present in all 4 directions, also up and down. We're going to learn when we do the 6 constant mitzvahs in our next study. The blue thread of the tzitzis is another memory trigger in the tzitzis. As we are taught, the blue is reminiscent of the ocean. The ocean reminds us of the heavens, and the heavens remind us of the throne of glory, which is a quote from Gemara Chulin 89a. So to remember, so yes, the Torah states that by seeing the tzitzis, one remembers, which in turn leads to doing the mitzvahs. So seeing the tzitzis is supposed to remind us to doing the mitzvahs. In Hasidus, memory that results from sight is called connection, the inner power of knowledge. So the inner power of das is not only yichud, unity, but it's also hiskashrus, connection. The root of connection, hiskashrus, means not, kesher, that's the root. This quality of connection vitalizes the sphere of Tiferes beauty, which is associated with clothing in general. Connection finally manifests indeed in the sphere of Yesod, foundation. So connection, hiskashrus, he's going to say a little more and then we'll speak a little bit more about it. The bottom paragraph on 115. There are 2 types of hiskashrus, of connection, both of which are represented in the tzitzis. Connection to Hashem's infinite light, connection to the Or Ein Sof, that's one, and connection to the tzaddik of the generation. Hiskashrus, this is very commonly used, this word, that the hiskashrus of a chassid and a rebbe, this connection. And there are days that are really strong for his kashrus, like Yud Shvat, which we recently had the yurtzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, and the day the Rebbe became Rebbe, Gimel Tammuz, Yud Kislev. You know, these Hasidic holidays are very strong in terms of his kashrus. And his kashrus, again, we're saying, is the inner part of tzitzis, his kashrus. So this his kashrus to Hashem's infinite light, and this is kashrus to the tzaddik of the generation. The white threads of the tzitzis represent Hashem's infinite light, and the blue thread represents his paradoxical ability to contract and concentrate his infinite light into a finite being, the tzaddik. I mean, that's already saying so much. Okay, let's, Hashem's paradoxical ability. So Hashem can expand and create the whole universe, and the universe is within him. He's bigger than the universe. He can expand, and he can also contract. He can contract his infinite light into a finite being. It's very interesting to think of a tzaddik, to think of a Rebbe as Hashem's infinite light contracted into a finite being. And his kashrus with the tzaddik is something that we really, whenever we have an opportunity, it's something to grow and encourage. A lot of strength comes to a chassid from his kashrus, his connection with the tzaddik. Appropriately, the Hebrew word for tzitzis, tzaddik yud taf, contains the two letters tzaddik, corresponding to the tzaddik of the world, which is Hashem, and the tzaddik of the generation. So the tzaddik of the generation, you know, we have the Rebbe, Reb Yitzhak, Y.Y. Jacobson. You know, we have to connect ourselves to its tzaddik. That's what, to be a chassid, one has to be connected to its tzaddik, to the tzaddik of the generation. A lot of strength comes from that. And it's interesting, speaking about Hashem's paradoxical ability to contract and concentrate his infinite light. Because for us to have a relationship with Hashem, there's so much of paradox, so much paradox in it, and that we know we spoke about many times, having chedva, having joy on one side of the heart and having crying on the other side of the heart, and that this is Jewish life. Because there's always something to cry about. I mean, there's, you know, I'm laughing and crying already. If I said, you know, find something to cry about, ladies, you know, we could do it. You know, I remember I was once, some nine-year-old actor got some like great prize in acting, and they asked, he was weeping and weeping in some scene in the movie, and they asked him, how did you manage to weep like that? And he said, like, he remembered when his dog died. I guess, you know, it's certainly traumatic. So he was able to cry in his acting role. So there's something to cry about. In the old Maksorim, it would say, cry here. People's lives were so tough that they could just cry. Just not crying was was hard. They could cry at any moment. Well, we can too, but also we have to have chedva, joy on the other side of our heart, the joy of being alive, of being in this world, the joy of each mitzvah, the joy of everything Hashem has given us. So it's both, and it's constantly changing. And this is sanity, is maintaining this balance between crying and smiling. But the Shulchan Aruch says, even with both, try to have a pleasant expression on your face, to not freak out everyone. We can't just sit home and cry. The guests come for Shabbos, you know, I'm still crying. It's like it doesn't set the right. Only crying on the inside, crying in empathy for people suffering. And sometimes crying is appropriate on the outside, but often having that pleasant expression. So it takes sanity to know which is the appropriate one, which, you know, okay. The blue thread of the tzitzis relates in particular to connecting to the tzaddik of the generation. Rabbi Nachman stated that a person should always see himself with the tzaddik, which is very interesting. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, to visualize yourself with the tzaddik. And for those of us who are lucky enough to have pictures of us with the Rebbe, it's not so hard to do that, but to visualize ourselves with the tzaddik, to visualize ourselves with Reb Yitzhak, meaning that he should be in the presence of a tzaddik, especially to hear him speak words of Torah. It's a great thing to hear a tzaddik speak words of Torah, to be in the presence of a tzaddik, to visualize ourselves. Since it is not always possible to be in the presence of a tzaddik, some people have the custom to carry a symbolic object to remind them of him, perhaps a picture or something that the tzaddik gave him, like dollars from the Rebbe or a picture of the Rebbe. It can be very helpful at times, especially if we've spoken about this idea that sometimes a picture of a tzaddik can come alive. You know, it's like something, you know, each person has to, a connection. His kashrus, you know, in terms of his kashrus with the Rebbe, there's many ways of experiencing it. There's writing a letter and sending it to the Ohel, which one can do online. Ohel Chabad, write a letter to the Rebbe, and then they'll send you this letter is being brought to the Rebbe's grave. Right now, it's personal. No one reads it. They just bring it to the Rebbe's grave. That's one way. There's connecting with a tzaddik by, there's letters of the Rebbe. People write a letter to the Rebbe and then open one of the Igris, one of the volumes of the Rebbe's letters, and read the letter that it opened to. I mean, we've got letters for very important decisions in our life from opening that. And then there's looking at a picture of a tzaddik. You think of a picture of the Rebbe, and sometimes, and others, even saner people than myself have said that pictures of the Rebbe can come alive and you can get answers. So this kashrus is a very personal thing. It's not like you can say there's one way to have his kashrus. Each person can have kashrus with the tzaddik of the generation in his own way. So let's see if we can finish this paragraph. When they look at it, they remember him, and this reinforces their connection with him. So connecting to the tzaddik of the generation is another way to improve our memories. So I think, especially if I can find a pen, yes, so I think this is where we should stop today.